Chapter 1, An Unforeseen Incident. Imperial Palace, one of Imperial City's most vibrant nightlife destinations, was renowned as one of the nation's most extravagant entertainment venues. As darkness fell, the area became awash in dazzling lights and flamboyant displays, its prosperity reminiscent of pre-liberation Shanghai. The ninth floor housed karaoke rooms, frequented by Imperial City's elite, influential figures, powerful individuals, and prominent business tycoons. The hostesses were primarily students from prestigious universities, along with aspiring models and minor celebrities seeking supplementary income. Clara Quinn wore a form-fitting, pale violet cheongsam with a high slit that revealed her long, porcelain-white legs as she moved. Her 11-centimeter heels clicked against the crystal floor, and a captivating smile graced her delicate, refined features. She smoothed her wine-red, wavy hair, styled in voluminous curls, her crimson lips curved into an alluring arc. A passing waiter couldn't help but gulp. Suddenly, her walkie-talkie crackled to life. Pressing the button, she heard a panicked, tearful female voice, "Manager Quinn, it's a disaster. The girl we just sent to room 009 somehow ended up in room 006. Some idiot switched the room numbers. So Flora Quinn is currently in room 006. Clara Quinn's smile froze, and she nearly flung the walkie-talkie across the room. Forcing herself to remain composed, she said coldly, "Don't panic. I'll handle it." Snapping the walkie-talkie shut, Clara Quinn hurried towards room 006. While the ninth-floor hostesses were undeniably stunning, Flora Quinn was an exception. Clara had paid a hefty sum to hire Flora, whose plain appearance and acne-ridden face served as a secret weapon against her incompetent brother. Knowing Marcus Quinn had arranged a gathering with friends at Imperial Palace, specifically in room 009 on the ninth floor, she had promptly dispatched Flora there. Unexpectedly, Flora had blundered into room 006. Imperial Palace's clientele consisted of individuals of considerable standing. Would they tolerate being presented with a subpar hostess? She could only hope the guests in room 006 were easygoing and wouldn't make a fuss. It was all Marcus Quinn's fault, that damned fool. The heir to Quinn Enterprises, he neglected his responsibilities, preferring to gallivant and idle instead of attending to his duties. Reaching room 006, still fuming, Clara Quinn took a deep breath and politely knocked 3 times. "Hello, I'm the floor manager. May I come in?" As soon as she finished speaking, the ornately decorated door swung open, revealing a strikingly handsome man with devilishly attractive features. Dressed in white, he narrowed his long, phoenix eyes, leaned against the doorframe, and raised an eyebrow at Clara Quinn with a languid air. In a perfect Beijing accent, he drawled, "Is this the caliber of hostesses at Imperial Palace? I could pull a random woman off the street who'd be more attractive than her." He gestured dismissively towards Flora Quinn, cowering in the corner. Flora Quinn looked pleadingly at Clara Quinn for help. Clara smoothed her hair, plastered a professional smile on her face, and calmly replied, "This is a misunderstanding. I'll immediately arrange for the most beautiful girl on the 9th floor to join you. I guarantee you'll be satisfied. To compensate for my oversight, I'll cover all your expenses tonight. Would that be acceptable?" Her demeanor, neither haughty nor timid, was perfectly composed. The man's playful gaze lingered on her tall figure for a few seconds before settling on her flawlessly delicate features. His tone shifted slightly, 3 drinks as an apology. "How about it?" Clara Quinn smiled and nodded. "No problem." As she spoke, the man lowered his arm, which had been barring the doorway, and stepped inside, hands in his pockets. "Come in." Clara Quinn gracefully followed him. The private room at the Imperial Palace was lavishly decorated, the ceiling crafted from Swarovski crystal. Rotating colored lights cast a dazzling glow across the spacious room. Slightly bothered by the bright lights, she instinctively shielded her eyes. "Henry's calling the shots tonight. He said the Imperial Palace princess was a vision. I was hoping for a feast for the eyes, but, tsk, what a disappointment. The man poured a drink as he spoke, his tone laced with mock regret. The moment she heard the name, Henry, Clara Quinn froze, blood rushing to her head. The pressure in her skull erased all coherent thought. Her hands slowly lowered from her eyes, long, curled lashes lifting to reveal a dazed gaze that met a pair of deep, dark pupils. Her stiff back straightened further, making it almost impossible to move. Henry Young lounged against the sofa, long fingers curled around a glass of red wine. His suit jacket was discarded, leaving him in a white dress shirt, the top 2 buttons undone, revealing a glimpse of sun-kissed skin, exuding a quiet magnetism. Drink. The man handed her the filled glass, his command a single, curt word. Hashtag chapter 2, what relationship? His voice broke through Clara Quinn's stupor. She forced a smile, took a few breaths to compose herself, and accepted the proffered glass of red wine. She shot a sardonic glance at Henry Young on the sofa. I never expected the famously upstanding businessman, CEO Young, to lower himself to a den of iniquity like the Imperial Palace. So, all that talk of your sterling reputation is just hot air, is it? You can know a person's face, but not their heart. I've learned that lesson today. Clara Quinn's voice dripped with animosity, her antagonism towards Henry Young palpable. The temperature in the room plummeted. The stranger whistled in surprise. Damn, lady, you've got guts. You can count on one hand the number of people in Imperial City who dare cross Henry. Brave. Ethan Reed, a word of advice, don't pal around with two-faced wolves like this one. You might find yourself sold out and counting his money one day. Clara Quinn glanced at the impassive Henry Young. His indifference fueled her anger, sharpening her words. You know me. Ethan Reed's playful gaze darted between Henry Young and Clara Quinn, his expression clearly suggesting, you two have a history. The young master of Reed Enterprises? A big name. Who doesn't know you? Clara Quinn's smile was laced with sarcasm. Clara Quinn, have you forgotten why you're here? Henry Young's low, easily recognizable voice suddenly broke the silence. His cold, distant tone instantly deflated Clara Quinn's defiant air. A bitter smile touched her lips. Henry Young could effortlessly ignite her passion, then just as easily extinguish her anger, like a sovereign wielding absolute power, gazing down from his lofty perch, decisive and unyielding. A truly cold and indifferent man, except at home, he always maintained a professional demeanor with her, devoid of any pretense. Was her choice ultimately right or wrong? Would her arduous perseverance and infatuated waiting be met with a worthy response? Clara Quinn's tense face broke into a weary smile as she tilted her head back, draining the glass of red wine, then snatching 2 more from Ethan Reed's hand, downing them without hesitation. The fiery, cold liquid trickled down her throat, sending a chilling jolt through her heart, as if only this could maintain her minimal composure. Ethan Reed stared at Clara Quinn with amusement, a captivating smile playing on his handsome features. Flora Quinn, let's go. Clara Quinn placed the empty glass on the table, pulling Flora Quinn from the corner towards the door. Before exiting, she heard Henry Young's icy voice echo from behind, have Clara Quinn find 2 people who can get on the table. Yes, Director Young. Clara Quinn paused, a chilling smile spreading across her lips, making them even colder. The door of room 006 slammed shut, severing the cold, scrutinizing gaze. Her strength seemed to drain away, her legs gradually weakening as she leaned against the cold wall, tears shimmering in her eyes. Clara Quinn, are you all right? Flora Quinn asked, a hint of confusion in her voice. Realizing someone else was present, Clara Quinn wiped her tears, forcing a brave smile. I'm fine. Go to room 009 and do as I instructed. Don't be afraid. Yes, Clara Quinn. Flora Quinn nodded, her short, plump legs carrying her towards the end of the hallway. Clara Quinn adjusted her hair and touched up her makeup, ensuring no trace of tears remained before resuming her alluring and charming demeanor. Inside the room, Ethan Reed crossed his legs, one arm casually draped over the sofa's armrest. He glanced at Henry Young swirling his wine, his eyes sparkling. "What's going on between you and Clara Quinn? She reacted to you like she'd swallowed dynamite. Quite different from when she first arrived." Henry Young watched the ripples spreading across the surface of the red wine, a sardonic smile playing on his thin lips, his deep black eyes gleaming with coldness. "Do you know who she is? Your one-night stand?" Ethan Reed guessed eagerly. "She's the heiress of Quinn Enterprises, Marcus Quinn's younger sister." Henry Young chuckled softly, taking a sip of red wine before slowly answering. Ethan Reed's eyes widened, disbelief etched across his handsome face. "She's the Quinn family's little princess. But with her status, why would she be working as a manager at a decadent place like the Imperial Palace? Don't the Quinns care about her?" "Care? The Quinns have thrown this whole mess at me." Henry Young narrowed his eyes, a dangerous glint in his dark pupils under the colored lights. His right index finger tapped lightly on the sofa's armrest, radiating a compelling pressure. Seeing Ethan Reed's bewildered expression, he downed a large gulp of liquor, the words grinding out from between his teeth, "Her name is Clara Quinn." "You sure you don't recognize it?" Chapter 3, His Wife, Should I? Ethan Reed took a sip of his drink, a familiar name suddenly flashing through his mind. Clara Quinn. Good heavens. Clara Quinn. The red wine Ethan Reed had just taken a mouthful of sprayed out, but he didn't bother wiping it off his face. Goosebumps erupted all over his body, and in his utter shock, he stammered, "I remember a few months ago, you told me, the person you married was named Quinn." "Clara Quinn. Right?" Henry Young nodded elegantly, the cold smile freezing at the corners of his thin lips, tightening into a frigid curve. "Bloody hell." Ethan Reed stood up and paced back and forth, completely unable to digest this earth-shattering news. Pointing at Henry Young, the astonishment on his face couldn't be contained. "At the time, I thought you were joking, but I didn't expect, damn it. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Since when have you ever known me to joke?" Henry Young shrugged indifferently, his voice as light as a breeze, yet laced with a chilling iciness. Ethan Reed glared at him. "Henry Young. Couldn't you have given me a heads up?" Now he'd made a fool of himself in front of the Quinn family's little princess, even forcing her to drink 3 glasses of wine. But why would the Quinn family's little princess, the young mistress of the Young Corporation, be in a sleazy joint like the Imperial Palace, working as a madam, connecting clients? Seeing his bewilderment, Henry Young casually explained, "Her father once saved my grandfather's life." "Don't tell me you were forced to marry the Quinn princess." Ethan Reed, understanding the implication, asked incredulously, "What era are we in, repaying a life-saving debt with marriage? What is this? Emotional blackmail? No wonder you don't like Clara Quinn, turns out she was forced on you." Henry Young didn't deny it. "The Quinn family's dowry was very generous. I didn't lose out. So you agreed to marry her for that?" Ethan Reed shook his head, his expression sympathetic towards Clara Quinn. "It's a waste for her to marry scum like you. I have to pull her out of this fiery pit. Don't bother. Even if you try to persuade her, she won't pay you any mind." Henry Young said indifferently, his dark eyes filled with apathy. "Reasoning with that kind of ungrateful woman is a waste of breath." Clara Quinn stopped just as she reached the door, her lips pressed tightly together, her facial muscles tense, her clear eyes holding a stubborn glint. This marriage was something she had shamelessly begged for. She knew doing so would disgust Henry Young, but she didn't care. She had loved him for over a decade, loved him to the point where she wouldn't regret even being torn to pieces. Lily Evans. Suddenly, she heard Henry Young murmur a woman's name. Her breath hitched, the walkie-talkie in her hand nearly crushed, her whole body trembling uncontrollably. He still yearned for that woman. A sense of defeat washed over her, and she gave a bitter laugh, hearing Ethan Reed ask in astonishment, "Lily Evans has been abroad for 2 years and hasn't returned. How can you still not forget her?" Lily Evans, she. The voice trailed off into the distance. Unwilling to endure another heart-wrenching word, before her heart could bleed, Clara Quinn rapped sharply on the door, calling out, "Excuse me," then pushed it open. "Number 2, Number 3, attend to Mr. Ethan Reed and CEO Young." Imperial Palace's hostesses were ranked by appearance, the lower the number, the more beautiful. Number 2 and Number 3 were recent Capital City University graduates, with minor roles in a recent television drama. One, a pure, lily-like Flora Quinn, the other, as dazzling as a siren. As the 2 women glided in, Clara Quinn, without acknowledging the scene within, bowed deeply and said politely, "Please enjoy yourselves, gentlemen. Let me know if you need anything. Clara Quinn, join us. It's our first meeting, and I'd like to chat with you." Ethan Reed, intensely curious about Clara Quinn, drew her inside, then gestured to Number 2 and Number 3. "You two, attend to Henry." Henry Young's name resonated throughout Capital City. Upon hearing they were to serve the Young Corporation CEO, Number 2 and Number 3 were visibly thrilled. They quickly settled beside him, their lithe bodies pressing close. "CEO Young, your reputation precedes you. You're even more handsome in person than on television." Henry Young smiled faintly, accepting their embrace. He wrapped his arms around their slender waists and murmured something into one's ear, causing both Number 2 and Number 3 to giggle. Their eyes flashed, they playfully punched his chest, and cooed, "You're terrible, terrible." The scene was charged with a provocative ambiguity. Clara Quinn stared fixedly at Henry Young's face, oblivious to Ethan Reed pulling her into a private room. She knew Henry Young was doing this deliberately, for her benefit. He was retaliating. #### Chapter 4 Brothers like these Imperial Palace hostesses were rigorously trained to entertain with drinks and song, never selling themselves. Yet, Henry Young's presence, his wealth, power, and youthful success as CEO of a multinational corporation, was enough to tempt even the usually aloof Number 2 and Number 3 to offer themselves. Securing him meant immeasurable prospects. Watching their flirtatious interplay, Clara Quinn felt a piece of her heart tear away, raw and bleeding. Her teeth clenched, a trickle of blood appearing at the corner of her lip. She remained frozen, her gaze fixed on Henry Young's gentle expression as he lounged on the sofa. He had never looked at her with such tenderness. Daring to flirt with Clara Quinn's man, right before her eyes. Daring such blatant intimacy on her own turf. They'd soon learn the consequences. Ethan Reed, noticing Clara Quinn's changing expression, was startled by the hatred in her eyes. "Miss Quinn, Henry," he. Before he could finish, Clara Quinn wrenched her hand from his, stormed across the room, yanked the 2 women away from Henry Young, and slapped both Number 2 and Number 3 hard across the face. The sharp cracks echoed through the room. Number 2 and Number 3, momentarily stunned, quickly recovered and shrieked in unison, "What are you doing? You're crazy. Get out." Clara Quinn gritted out, fearing she'd tear these 2 wretched women apart if they stayed a moment longer. Perhaps her expression was too terrifying. Number 2 and Number 3 exchanged a naive glance before bursting into tears and fleeing. Clara Quinn fought to steady her ragged breath, glancing at Henry Young. He leaned against the sofa, arms crossed, his earlier gentle demeanor replaced by a chilling indifference. His eyes held a mocking glint, unsurprised by her outburst, as if it were all part of his plan. The fire in her chest was doused with ice water, leaving her numb and cold. Instinctively, she bit her lip, tasting blood, realizing she'd drawn it. "You." Rage choked her, chest heaving. A torrent of unspoken grievances welled up. What could she even ask? Why this cruelty? Why disregard her sacrifice? Why this deliberate humiliation? You were half a minute faster than I anticipated, Henry Young stated flatly, his deep-set eyes glacial, his voice devoid of emotion, as if recounting something mundane. Next time, be quicker. His casual words cut deeper than any blade. Clara Quinn trembled, a dry leaf in the autumn wind. Chin held high, she refused to cry. She thought she'd grown accustomed to his coldness, but each encounter left her breathless with pain. Ethan Reed, finding the two incredibly peculiar, moved to intervene when the door burst open. A worried woman, about 30, rushed in. Manager, there's a fight in room 009. You need to handle it. Clara Quinn remembered the battle awaiting her. Composing herself, she glanced at Henry Young's impassive face, her lips silently forming the words, I won't give up. With that, she turned and strode from the room. Before them, she was the capable, resourceful manager Quinn of the Imperial Palace. Behind the facade, she was the privileged princess of the Quinn family. Her pride would not be trampled. The woman bowed deeply, apologizing profusely to Ethan Reed and Henry Young. Ethan Reed waved it off. Henry Young's dark, brooding gaze remained fixed on the space Clara Quinn had occupied, even after she was gone. Inside room 009, the door hung wide open, revealing chaos. Shards of glass littered the floor, overturned furniture lay scattered. As Clara Quinn approached, a red wine bottle smashed at her feet. Startled, then quickly regaining her composure, she crossed her arms, observing the man wreaking havoc. Marcus Quinn, she said, a sardonic smile playing on her lips, you've got guts, bringing this to the Imperial Palace. Clara Quinn. What are you doing here? Marcus Quinn stopped his rampage, staring towards the door. He wore white trousers and a blue shirt, his features bearing a slight resemblance to Clara Quinn. His appearance was somewhat effeminate, yet his features were delicate, his aura reminiscent of a newly popular heartthrob. You can come here, why can't I? Clara Quinn glanced inside the karaoke room, where three sloppily dressed young men were lounging. She recognized them as rich kids, living off their family's money, the same ilk as Marcus Quinn. Chapter 5, Confrontation. A flashily dressed man next to Marcus Quinn saw Clara Quinn at the door. His eyes lit up and he nudged Marcus with his elbow. Who's this beauty? She's gorgeous. Introduce me, will ya? Clara Quinn had been sheltered by the Quinn family since childhood. Outsiders only knew that the Quinn family had a cherished little princess, but were unaware of her appearance. My sister, Clara Quinn. Marcus Quinn replied impatiently, then frowned at her. What are you doing here? If Mom and Dad find out, you'll get a scolding. I should return those words right back to you. Clara Quinn curled her lip disdainfully, twirling a strand of hair around her finger. Anyway, I'm married now. Mom and Dad can't control me. Besides, compared to you, they seem to favor me more. Her boast was obvious. Marcus Quinn grabbed a glass and threw it towards her, his mood suddenly sour. Get out. Don't think that marrying Henry Young and becoming the Young family's young mistress gives you the right to act recklessly. If you hadn't shamelessly driven a wedge between him and Lily Evans, would you even have a chance at being the Young family's mistress? Hearing the name of the woman she hated so intensely, Clara Quinn couldn't maintain her composure. She narrowly dodged the flying glass, no longer bothering to feign sibling affection. She sneered, wasn't it you who was happiest when I broke them up? Don't think I don't know you've liked Lily Evans for years. Too bad her status is so low, just an orphan with a questionable background. Mom and Dad would never let her through the Quinn family's front door. Give it up. You venomous woman. How could I, Marcus Quinn, have such a shameless sister? Marcus Quinn exploded, veins bulging on his forehead like an enraged beast. So what if Lily Evans is of low birth? She has a kind heart, 1,000 times better than you, you crazy woman. He looked Clara Quinn up and down, his tone dripping with contempt. You think by dressing like Lily Evans, imitating her every move, you can become her? You're a poor imitation, a dog trying to paint a tiger. No matter how hard you try to mimic Lily Evans, you're not even worth a single strand of her hair. In Henry Young's heart, you don't even qualify as her substitute. Every word struck Clara Quinn's deepest insecurities. She felt like a clown-stripped bear, exposed under the harsh sunlight. A wave of humiliation washed over her, drowning all reason. She lunged at him, wanting to slap him hard, but Marcus Quinn intercepted her. He looked at her with disdain. Hit a nerve, did I? Can't take it. When you chased Lily Evans away, did you know how heartbroken I was? You never think of anyone but yourself. Clara Quinn. You're a selfish wretch. His eyes were bloodshot, his face fierce. Clara Quinn had never seen her brother so out of control. She flinched, then laughed coldly, the sting of old wounds deepened by a fresh cut. This was her own brother, yelling at her, humiliating her in front of everyone, all for a woman. Hurt. Clara Quinn's cold laughter echoed as she gracefully withdrew her hand. Unwilling to be outdone, she glared at Marcus Quinn. I'll show you hurt. The onlookers, captivated by the drama, held their breath, silently watching the siblings clash. What are you planning now? Marcus Quinn eyed her warily. Going to run to Mom and Dad again? Clara Quinn, you're truly something, exploiting their favoritism. You really don't respect me, your own brother, do you? Why would you think that? Clara Quinn rubbed her sore wrist, a cryptic smile playing on her lips. Each word, clear and distinct, resonated in the empty karaoke room. Because you've never been worth my notice. With that, she turned to leave, but a sharp pain shot through her waist as a powerful force sent her sprawling. Marcus Quinn's enraged roar followed, Clara Quinn. Say that again. Marcus, what are you doing? What if you damage your sister's beautiful face? The man beside him protested, rushing to Clara Quinn's side to help her up. Clara Quinn felt a warm trickle on her lip. Touching it, she realized her nose was bleeding, the impact having been quite forceful. She scrambled up from the floor. As she moved, a sharp pain shot through her right ankle, it was probably sprained. She pushed away the fawning man and, with a parting shot, Marcus Quinn, I'll return this kick tenfold, limped out of the karaoke room. Refusing the waiter's assistance, she clung to the wall, slowly making her way down the long corridor, unaware of the deep, brooding eyes that followed her solitary, somewhat desolate figure. Chapter 6, a foul mood. Clara Quinn couldn't help but feel saddened. She and Marcus Quinn were maternal twins, and they had been very close since childhood. But she didn't know when Marcus Quinn had started to distance himself from her. Even her attempts to win him over couldn't elicit a smile. Then, Lily Evans's arrival completely froze their sibling relationship, leading to increasingly frequent arguments. Not being good with words, Clara Quinn didn't want to keep pushing, and gradually, they became strangers living under the same roof. This wasn't the first time Marcus Quinn had hit her. The day Lily Evans left, he had slapped her hard several times and kicked her. From that day on, Clara Quinn had given up any illusions about her brother. She had indeed driven Lily Evans away, but the truth of the matter wasn't what they perceived. Clara Quinn returned to her room, took off her high heels, and gently massaged her ankle, occasionally wincing. The pain brought beads of sweat to her forehead. Flora Quinn timidly entered, her face full of expectation. Clara Quinn, I kissed Mr. Marcus Quinn on the cheek. Do I get a bonus? Kissed. Clara Quinn froze, so that's why Marcus Quinn looked murderous. For him, a man who swore to save himself for Lily Evans, being kissed by a woman who wasn't pretty, even ugly, must be unacceptable. Her foul mood brightened considerably. Smiling, she pulled 50,000 yuan from her purse. Of course. Take it. After seeing Flora Quinn off with profuse thanks, the second visitor to the lounge was the manager of Imperial Palace, Vivian Bloom, also Clara Quinn's only close friend. Vivian Bloom, once a madam at the Imperial Palace, climbed the ranks, cultivated connections, and with the help of a few foolish rich men, secured 10% of the Imperial Palace's shares, becoming one of its managers, overseeing its daily operations. "Clara, are you all right?" Vivian Bloom's booming voice echoed. "I told you, you're still so useless. Hit and you don't hit back. Hiding here crying, does that suit your status as the Quinn family's eldest daughter? Where's your spirit? Vivian, where did you see me crying?" Clara Quinn forced a smile. Vivian was nicknamed Bloomy by Clara, after an essential feminine item. "Come on, your smile is worse than your tears." Vivian Bloom was the alluring type, every move radiating feminine charm, leaving countless men smitten. She crouched, holding Clara's sprained foot. "I know how to set bones. Bear with me." With a sudden, forceful motion, she realigned the joint. "Ouch! That hurts." Clara Quinn cried out, then chuckled wryly. "Sometimes I wonder if you're a secret agent. You know everything, even bone setting." Vivian Bloom gave a wry smile. "Don't exaggerate. It's just a basic life skill." Changing the subject, she said, "By the way, I've tallied the damage your brother did to the equipment. It's close to 1,000,000 yuan. At the mention of Marcus Quinn, Clara Quinn's smile vanished. She instinctively touched her still aching waist, gritted her teeth, and pulled out her phone, dialing a number. Vivian Bloom, knowing who she was calling, looked gleeful. "Hello, Dad. It's Clara." She started to cry, and hearing the worried voice on the other end, she sobbed, "My brother just hit me, kicked me. It hurts so much, boo-hoo." "What? He dared to hit you?" Mr. Quinn, working at the company, exploded. "Darling, don't cry. When he gets back, I'll teach him a lesson." "You want me to freeze all his credit cards?" "Fine, no problem." Satisfied with the response, Clara Quinn hung up, wiping her tears, laughing and crying at once. Excitedly, she hugged the smiling Vivian Bloom. "Vivian, I can finally get my revenge." Vivian Bloom gently stroked her hair. Though Clara Quinn always appeared mature and capable, inside she was still a child, needing protection, craving recognition, sensitive and fragile. Watching Clara marry Henry Young, the man of her dreams, only to wither away day by day, filled Vivian Bloom with both heartache and helplessness. "Clara, it's been half a year, do you regret it? Can you really keep going like this, day after day, year after year?" Vivian Bloom had lost count of how many times she'd asked this question, but each time Clara Quinn resolutely shook her head. Clara Quinn fell silent for a rare 2 or 3 seconds, then shook her head, her eyes distant and uncertain. "Is it possible?" ### Chapter 7, Jealousy's Fury. "You see, even you are starting to doubt yourself. To marry Henry Young, you've paid such a heavy price, and he doesn't even know it. He didn't even give you a proper wedding ceremony, let alone announce the marriage." Seeing the negativity in Clara's face, Vivian Bloom's heart ached, and she continued to try and persuade her. "Henry Young has been married to you for so long, but outside, he's still President Young, calling the wind and summoning the rain, surrounded by beautiful women. And you? Your devoted love is rewarded with his utter indifference. A place like the Imperial Palace, decent men wouldn't even set foot in it. Don't I have a wedding ring?" Clara Quinn raised her ring finger, displaying the large diamond ring that symbolized her marriage. She smiled, but the melancholy in her eyes was hard to conceal. "That's just something he casually had his assistant pick up from a jewelry store. He doesn't take you seriously at all. Besides, did you see him wearing a wedding ring just now?" "No. Clara, How long are you going to keep fooling yourself? Vivian Bloom looked at her with exasperation, her words growing sharper. How do you know his assistant bought the ring? Clara Quinn asked suspiciously. Vivian Bloom's eyes flickered, her smile faltering. She explained awkwardly, I saw it before, but I didn't want to upset you, so I didn't say anything. The explanation was plausible enough, and Clara Quinn nodded, a flicker of hurt in her eyes. She clenched her fists, her expression resolute. I persevered for over a decade and finally became his wife. There's no reason to back down now. Vivian Bloom sighed, knowing she couldn't convince Clara Quinn. She patted her hand. I'll go get your brother to pay for the damages to the Imperial Palace. I can't wait to see his face when his card gets declined. It'll be hilarious. Clara Quinn chuckled, wanting to join her, but as she stood up, her body felt heavy and she collapsed back onto the sofa. Clutching her side, she sighed regretfully. Oh, it's a shame I can't see it with my own eyes. Give me a play-by-play when you get back. Vivian Bloom rolled her eyes good-naturedly and, swaying her alluring hips, sauntered out of the lounge. Clara Quinn massaged her injured side as she waited for Vivian Bloom. It wasn't long before she returned, her captivating face bearing a barely suppressed grin. Bursting through the door, she vividly recounted Marcus Quinn's inability to pay. Clara Quinn laughed until her stomach hurt. Oh, right, Thursday Bow, those two, number 2 and number 3, were all over him. Get rid of them. Remembering the two women clinging to Henry Young, Clara Quinn's face darkened, her voice turning cold. I know, I've paid them and sent them home. Vivian Bloom said, half joking, I really hope Henry Young doesn't come to the Imperial Palace anymore, or this place will go bankrupt sooner or later. Clara Quinn shook her head with a wry smile. Henry Young probably hated her to the bone by now. The more she hated something, the more he liked it. She knew he enjoyed seeing her go crazy, suffer, and feel helpless. Clara Quinn, Sister Vivian. Clara Quinn's assistant suddenly entered, her face a bit unsightly. Without beating around the bush, she quickly said, just now, CEO Young took number 0, Susan, and said he wanted to. She glanced at Clara Quinn's astonished face. He said he wanted to take Susan to a hotel for the night. What's going on? Did she forget the rule about number 0s not being allowed out? How dare she? Vivian Bloom suddenly stood up, her face full of anger. She even dares to spend the night with a guest. Does she really think this 9th floor of the Imperial Palace can't do without her? As soon as Susan saw CEO Young, her legs turned to jelly. She practically threw herself at him. She must have forgotten that rule completely. Good. Both of them dare to steal Clara Quinn's man. Clara Quinn's delicate features twisted slightly, her teeth clenched in anger. Vivian Bloom saw this resentful look on her face and knew something big was about to happen. Clara Quinn was infatuated with Henry Young. When it came to him, she would resort to any means necessary. Don't be angry. Leave it to me. I definitely won't let any other woman touch your man. Vivian Bloom comforted her, then whispered something in her assistant's ear. The assistant nodded repeatedly and quickly left. Susan is a minor celebrity. What are celebrities most afraid of? Negative press, of course. I've already had someone film her serving drinks at the Imperial Palace. I'm not afraid of her disobeying me. Facing Clara Quinn's questioning gaze, Vivian Bloom explained. Clara Quinn's agitated mood calmed down. She felt a headache coming on, and as soon as she relaxed, exhaustion washed over her. I'm going home. Shall I have someone take you back? Vivian Bloom asked with concern. No need, I can drive myself. Clara Quinn declined her offer. The injury from Marcus Quinn's kick was fine after she had massaged it for half a day. She stood up, waved to Vivian Bloom, and said, bye-bye, see you tomorrow. Hashtag Chapter 8 Alienated affection. Leaving the lounge, a charming smile played on Clara Quinn's lips, her eyes sparkling. Although her waist still ached slightly from the high heels, she endured it, maintaining her usual elegant and alluring demeanor as she walked out. In room 006, Ethan Reed watched regretfully as Susan, who had been laughing and chatting just moments before, received a phone call and left in a huff. He held his forehead and sighed, "No wonder you don't like the Quinn family's little princess. She's shrewish, unreasonable, and plays too many games. What good is beauty? It's just an empty shell." Henry Young slowly buttoned the jade-colored button at his collar, his expression unchanged, but his heart was far from calm. The image of Marcus Quinn kicking Clara Quinn kept flashing through his mind. She had always been noble and elegant. He thought he would be happy to see her in such a sorry state. After all, his disgust for Clara Quinn was deeply ingrained in his bones. Yet, at this moment, he felt no joy whatsoever. Conversely, an unfamiliar sentiment lingered, impossible to dispel. "I recall you own a bar Marcus Quinn frequents, isn't that right?" Henry Young's voice, cold as eternal ice, pierced Ethan Reed. "Send President Quinn photos of his debauchery there." "Huh?" Ethan Reed, stunned, took a moment to process before excitedly jumping in front of him, staring as if at a monster. "Are you avenging Clara Quinn for that kick?" Henry Young paused, his hand reaching for his vest, his expression unreadable. "You think too much. Marcus Quinn is incompetent. As her nominal husband, isn't it normal for me to want my share of the assets? You wouldn't be maintaining this marriage with Clara Quinn just to seize Quinn Enterprises, would you?" Ethan Reed wore an expression of disbelief. Though he found Clara Quinn capricious and arrogant, her character wasn't truly bad, just a spoiled little princess. Moreover, being infatuated can lead to irrational acts, but even if Henry Young despised Clara Quinn, he shouldn't exploit their marriage to scheme against her family's fortune. "You could see it that way." Henry Young chuckled, his eyes glinting with the self-assuredness of a man in control, his domineering aura radiating like an emperor surveying his domain. Ethan Reed, intending to rebuke him, found himself speechless, a wave of pity washing over him. Meeting Henry Young was Clara Quinn's unavoidable tribulation. In the Imperial Palace parking garage, Clara Quinn located her car and retrieved her keys. Before she could insert them into the ignition, two men emerged from either side of the vehicle. Startled, she instinctively recoiled, her back colliding with something solid. A lewd voice whispered in her ear, "Worthy of the Quinn family's pampered little princess, such a sweet scent. You dare speak so insolently, knowing I belong to the Quinn family?" In the next instant, Clara Quinn reacted, turning to lean against the car door, her gaze steady but betraying a flicker of fear as she assessed the three men blocking her escape. Her brow furrowed in horrified recognition. "I remember you. You're Marcus Quinn's friends. I just saw you in room 009. Seems you miss us too. Marcus Quinn said you got his bank card frozen by CEO Quinn. We even covered his compensation. He doesn't have a malicious little sister like you. Just one night with us, and you can forget the debt." The speaker, the same man who had whispered to Clara Quinn earlier, ogled her curves, swallowing hard. Over $1 million to enjoy such a stunning beauty, the Quinn family's jade maiden no less. What a bargain. He concluded with a triumphant laugh. "Marcus Quinn sent you?" Clara Quinn felt as if struck by lightning, turning to stone, a chilling draft seeping into her bones. The last flicker of hope she held for Marcus Quinn was extinguished. Her own brother offered her to another man to enjoy. Just because she told their father, leading to his credit card being frozen, he resorted to such a cruel method of revenge. How ironic, such a brother exists in this world. For a moment, Clara Quinn was overwhelmed with sorrow, despair, and indignation consuming her entire being. "CEO Young hasn't touched you yet, has he? I'm in luck today, I'll be the first one up later." The man rubbed his hands, his lustful gaze fixated on her ample bosom, his pupils practically bulging out. Without a man to serve you, you must be very lonely, right? Today, we brothers will let you enjoy yourself to the fullest. As soon as he finished speaking, he lunged at her like a starved tiger. Clara Quinn, already prepared, grabbed her handbag and slammed it hard against his head. Seeing him clutching his head in pain, she seized the opportunity to escape. Bitch! You refuse a toast only to drink a forfeit. The man cursed, waving his hand, and chased after her with two others. Chapter 9, A hero rescues a damsel. Henry Young was about to leave the Imperial Palace from the private room when suddenly his phone in his pocket buzzed a few times. His eyes flickered. Taking out his phone, he quickly opened an application. Ethan Reed curiously leaned in for a look and raised an eyebrow. A tracking app. Henry, when did you become a detective? On the phone screen was a map clearly marked with routes, on which a red dot was moving rapidly. Henry Young's cold face was covered with a layer of frost, a bloodthirsty glint flashing in his eyes. He tilted his head and said coldly to Ethan Reed, Imperial Palace underground parking lot. Clara Quinn is in danger. Go save her. This red dot is little Princess Quinn. She's your wife, right? This hero-saving damsel scene isn't suitable for an outsider like me to interfere, is it? Ethan Reed was taken aback before understanding. If you babble one more word, the mining area north of the city won't be yours anymore. Henry Young suppressed the irritation in his heart, his expression becoming even more indifferent. Two faint flames flickered in his cold, black pupils. In front of his good friend, he rarely used such a commanding tone. All right, I'll go, all right. Ethan Reed raised his hands in surrender. Thinking of the girl who tried to act mature but was actually still very naive in danger, he couldn't help but feel a little worried. Striding to the door, he suddenly remembered something, a question popping out from his beautiful lips. Don't you hate her to the bone? Why are you so worried as soon as she's in danger? Henry, don't tell me you've fallen for her. The word like carried a powerful impact. Henry Young pressed his lips into a firm line, his voice resolute and without a doubt. Ethan Reed. You talk too much nonsense. Ethan Reed shrugged and strode out of the private room. Perhaps he had thought wrong. If Henry truly had feelings for Clara Quinn, he wouldn't arrange for him to save her. Clara Quinn ran desperately, her high heels long discarded somewhere unknown. Ignoring the throbbing pain in her ankle, she sprinted with all her might, scanning the vast parking lot. A sudden pang of regret hit her for coming to the Imperial Palace to provoke Henry Young. Not only had she failed to irritate him, but she'd also landed herself in a heap of trouble. And Marcus Quinn, he was her own brother. A crystal-clear tear traced a path down Clara Quinn's cheek as she ran blindly in sheer panic. Suddenly, she collided with someone, her body losing control as she tumbled to the ground. Before she could scramble back up, a heavenly male voice boomed, Little princess, what's all this? Why such a rush? Ethan Reed? Clara Quinn looked up, a mixture of relief and fear washing over her as she met his devilishly handsome face. A sheen of perspiration glistened on his forehead. A warmth spread through her as she clutched his hand. Save me, someone wants to hurt me. Her small hand was soft and cold. Ethan Reed instinctively tightened his grip, gently pulling her to her feet. Clara Quinn felt a wave of relief wash over her. Her body felt weak and limp, her legs trembling. If Ethan Reed hadn't swiftly caught her slender waist, she would have crumpled to the ground. Holding her, he realized how fragile she was, as if a gentle breeze could sweep her away. Ethan Reed's heart softened, his voice incredibly gentle. Don't worry, I'm here. No one can bully you. His words of concern warmed Clara Quinn's heart. Her eyes stung, and she fought back tears. Why did even a stranger care for her so much? while the person she longed for and missed most was nowhere to be seen during her time of need. The three men pursuing Clara Quinn stopped, eyeing Ethan Reed with apprehension and uncertainty. They recognized him, of course. Ethan, the young master of Reed Enterprises, was not someone they could afford to cross. Ethan Reed lazily raised a flirtatious eyebrow, glancing at the trio. They exchanged glances, not daring to utter a word, and scurried away with their tails between their legs. Clara Quinn's eyes were vacant, her body leaning powerless against Ethan Reed's chest. Gone was the arrogance she displayed in the private room, gone was the elegant composure she presented to the world. She was simply a pitiful woman yearning for love, yet unloved. Turning, Ethan Reed saw the mist in her clear eyes, her small face pale. Something within him stirred. On impulse, he swept the dazed Clara Quinn into his arms and carried her towards his Bentley. Carefully fastening her seatbelt, Ethan Reed started the car. The black Bentley slowly exited the underground parking lot, a scene witnessed by Henry Young, who happened to be holding his phone. The moment Ethan Reed embraced Clara Quinn, he instinctively rose to his feet, but then retracted his step, settling back down. His gaze, dark and intense, fixed on Clara Quinn's pale face, a storm brewing within him. After asking for Clara Quinn's address, Ethan Reed drove her home, watching her unsteady steps as she entered the villa. He lit a cigarette, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. He didn't rush to leave, watching as she fumbled with her keys, and finally, as she closed the door, she waved at him, a faint, sweet smile gracing her beautiful face, as if grateful for his rescue. Chapter 10, Delayed Action Poison. Ethan Reed recalled her fleeting smile, slightly dazed. The sharp-tongued little Princess Quinn, when she laughed, was so innocently lovely, especially with her two small canine teeth, utterly pure, completely at odds with her overly mature appearance. Remembering Lily Evans, whom he had met once, Ethan Reed suddenly came to his senses, his eyes darkening. He tossed his cigarette butt, hit the gas, and drove off. Clara Quinn had endured too much stimulation that night. Her already sensitive nerves were on edge. Without removing her makeup, she lay on the bed, drifting off to sleep. But the image of Henry Young with another woman, their intimate whispers, and Marcus Quinn's mocking words all came flooding back. She clutched her head in pain, feeling as if it would explode. Supporting her weary body, she pulled out sleeping pills from the drawer, poured out a few without looking, swallowed them, drank a glass of water. Crawled back into bed, and quickly succumbed to the drug's effect, falling into a deep sleep. Ever since she had gotten her wish of marrying Henry Young, she had suffered from insomnia. The nights were long and endless in their lavish room, which was supposed to be their love nest, but Henry Young had never set foot in it. Even on their wedding day, he hadn't bothered to see her. Married for over 6 months, let alone touch her, he hadn't even kissed her. They met like strangers, yet they were husband and wife. Wasn't this the most ridiculous joke in the world? Clara Quinn drifted off to sleep in tears. Waking up the next morning, she found a large wet patch on her pillow. Rubbing her temples, she felt a splitting headache. She casually grabbed the remote control from the table, turned on the TV, and listlessly flipped through the channels. Suddenly, her eyes, filled with both shock and anger, fixed on an entertainment news report broadcasting on Capital City Television. A large headline scrolled across the screen, catching her attention. Young Corporation CEO and actress Susan Ward spent a passionate night at the Arc de Triomphe Hotel, Susan Ward seen leaving the room the next morning. Susan Ward was the top girl on the 9th floor of the Imperial Palace, the same woman who wanted to spend the night with Henry Young at the hotel last night. So, Susan Ward had actually hooked her man. And it was all over the headlines. Last night, while she endured the horror of being violated by another man, he was embracing another woman in a hotel, lost in passionate lovemaking. Clara Quinn's body trembled, her slender shoulders shaking violently. Tears of suppressed humiliation poured down, soaking into the sheets and blankets, leaving no trace. She was his legal wife. Yet Henry Young seemed to have deliberately forgotten this. What was she? Not even a plaything. In the surrounding silence, Clara Quinn cried her heart out, releasing her shame and humiliation. She feared that if she continued to suppress it, she would suffocate. Just then, the shrill ringing of the phone broke the silence. Wiping her tears, she fumbled for the phone under her pillow, her voice hoarse. "Hello, Mother. Clara, something terrible has happened. Your brother has been beaten, badly injured. He's in the hospital now, and he kept calling your name while unconscious. Come quickly and see him." Madam Quinn's anxious voice came through clearly. Her hand holding the phone trembled. Clara Quinn tried to compose herself, a cold smile playing on her lips. "He called my name. I'm afraid he just wishes I were dead. Besides, he usually hangs out with those thugs. He probably offended someone, and they're taking revenge." "Child, how dare you speak like that?" Unlike Master Quinn, who only doted on his daughter, Madam Quinn loved both her children. Upon hearing her daughter's rebellious words, she scolded, "Your brother is in the hospital, and you haven't even visited him. Have you no conscience?" The last shred of sibling affection between Clara Quinn and Marcus Quinn had completely vanished last night. Just recalling how her brother had sent someone to assault her, Clara Quinn couldn't contain her grief. She, who was always obedient in front of her mother, now flared up, who has no conscience. "Mother, you should ask clearly what your precious son did to me last night." She slammed the phone down, suddenly feeling betrayed by the whole world. She had done everything, discarded her status as the Quinn family's young mistress, even paid an unimaginable price to marry Henry Young, yet he treated her like nothing. And her brother, for a woman who had nothing to do with him, had cruelly ordered someone to assault his own sister. Clara Quinn covered her face and wept silently, her tears dried up, her eyes stinging. She opened a drawer, took out a bottle of pills, poured out 2 and swallowed them. These pills could calm her nerves and relieve pressure, but the doctor had warned her that taking too many would have serious side effects. From 1 pill a day at first, to 2 pills a day now, still not enough. Clara Quinn's tense nerves gradually relaxed. Looking up at the television, the news about Henry Young and Susan Ward was still playing. A ruthless glint flashed in her calm eyes, and without hesitation, she called Vivian Bloom. "Vivian, you know a lot of people in the underworld. Help me, ruin Susan Ward. Hashtag Chapter 11 Let's get divorced." Vivian Bloom's sleepy face suddenly snapped awake. She sat up straight, wondering if something was wrong with her hearing. She remained stunned for almost half a minute, until Clara Quinn impatiently repeated her words, that she finally came to her senses. "Clara. Are you crazy? That's illegal. Vivian, don't talk to me about legality. If Susan Ward dares to fight with me, Clara Quinn, over a man, she should be prepared to be destroyed at any moment." Despite the calming effect of the pills, Clara Quinn's face was still extremely pale. "All right, I'll listen to you." On the other end of the line, Vivian Bloom was silent for a long time, then heavily uttered those words. Ending the call, Clara Quinn grabbed a bottle of red wine, leaned against the headboard, and put the bottle to her lips, her eyes staring blankly at the television screen. Sipping the wine, her thoughts became more and more tangled, impossible to unravel. Suddenly, the lock on the bedroom door turned. She instinctively tilted her head, and a cold, hard face came into view. She blinked, her first feeling was that she was dreaming. Why was Henry Young here? He found even glancing at her superfluous. Shouldn't he be at the company handling work or with Susan Ward at this time? Pulling her stiff lips into a semblance of a smile, Clara Quinn withdrew her gaze. In countless dreamy nights, she had also thought she saw Henry Young, but reality proved that it was all just her wishful thinking. She suspected she was on the verge of madness, likely a side effect of the medication she'd just taken. She was supposed to avoid alcohol with it, the consequences dire if she didn't, yet she'd forgotten. Henry Young's gaze, cold as an ancient well, fell upon her pale face, her hair disheveled, eyes swollen, a half-empty bottle of red wine dangling from her hand. The large bed was in disarray. He'd never seen Clara Quinn so pathetic, so utterly defeated, like a lifeless puppet, living in squalor. A wave of emotion washed over Henry Young, a flicker of shock in his eyes. In the next instant, he seemed unable to control his steps, advancing towards the edge of the bed, looking down at her from above. Was it Marcus Quinn's actions last night that had left her in this state? A pang of regret struck Henry Young. He shouldn't have just taught Marcus Quinn a lesson, he should have had him crippled. Henry Young. What are you doing here? Seeing the figure remain motionless, Clara Quinn realized it wasn't a hallucination. She burped ungracefully, then abruptly jumped up, without a thought, raising her hand and slapping him. Henry Young. I don't want to see you. Get out. The unexpected slap landed on Henry Young's contemplative face. The sharp sound echoed in Clara Quinn's ears. Both were momentarily stunned. Henry Young's brow furrowed. This was the first time she'd struck him, the first time she'd told him to leave, the first time she'd said she didn't want to see him. He knew the lengths she'd gone to, the despicable tactics she'd employed, just to see him, even daring to enter a filthy place like the Imperial Palace. I have something to tell you. Unexpectedly, Henry Young's tone and expression were calm, not the thunderous rage Clara Quinn had anticipated. Her anxious heart settled, but a deep sorrow followed. He didn't even seem to want to be angry with her. Standing so close, his heavy, hot breath washed over her face like an invisible net, trapping her. Clara Quinn turned her head in disgust, her eyes indifferent. Get away from me, you filth. He'd spent last night entangled with Susan Ward. Just the thought of it tore at her heart, chilling her to the bone. What the hell is wrong with you? For someone as arrogant as Henry Young to be called filth, he was naturally displeased. He felt this woman was pushing her luck. The slap, coupled with her disgusting words, extinguished any flicker of pity he'd felt. His patience with her had reached its limit. I am going crazy. Clara Quinn pointed at the TV, her expression frantic. Where were you last night when I was being humiliated? You were in another woman's bed. Henry Young. Am I even your wife? Following her finger to the TV screen, the image of him with his arm around Susan Ward's waist, entering a hotel, appeared clearly in his dark pupils. With a single glance, he turned away, his voice icy. Consider it so. Consider it so. Consider it. Tears streamed down Clara Quinn's face. The taut string within her snapped. She sank onto the bed, her eyes vacant, her beautiful face drained of color, like a porcelain doll, ready to shatter. His words were the final straw. Clara Quinn suddenly felt her decade-plus years of perseverance and effort were meaningless, murmuring, Henry Young, let's divorce. Loving you is too exhausting. I can't love you anymore. Chapter 12, One crazy night she was acutely aware of her health. Because of her love for Henry Young, she lived under constant pressure, her heart perpetually in suspense, her nerves taut like a bowstring. Her sleep grew increasingly fitful, her hair fell out in clumps, and only thick makeup could conceal her haggard appearance. She finally regretted it. Henry Young's initially calm eyes instantly turned dark and icy. He gripped her chin, staring intently at her face, as if he would flay her alive the next second. Congratulations, I'm withdrawing. You're free. The pain in her chin was no longer felt, because her heart was already shattered, the extreme pain turning into numbness. You still owe me, and you want to leave? Henry Young glared at her, his grip on her chin tightening, his heart filled with fury. Go find your Lily Evans. I should go find my own happiness. Her mind blank, Clara Quinn said listlessly. Happiness? Thinking of the glaring scene he witnessed last night, Henry Young's icy gaze swept over her slender yet still curvaceous figure, each word as cold as ice. Hooking up with Ethan Reed, are you? Social climbing? Clara Quinn, I'm warning you. You're my legal wife. Without my permission. You won't fly into another man's arms, or I'll break your wings. Humph. Clara Quinn chuckled faintly, sadness spreading across her face. She remembered the thug last night telling her, CEO Young hasn't touched you, right? Her throat tightened. What could be more humiliating? What kind of wife am I to you? Henry Young. You've disdained being with me, so isn't my letting you go exactly what you want? So you blame me for not sleeping with you? Her small face was drenched in shimmering tears, her pitiful appearance causing a tightening in Henry Young's lower abdomen. He rasped out a few words, devoid of pity, devoid of heartache, only the relief of a completed task. Then as you wish. With that, his hand moved to her waist. Clara Quinn hadn't changed out of that cheongsam from last night. With a sharp tug, the delicate fabric ripped. In an instant, Henry Young stripped her bare. No. Henry Young. Get out. Don't. Clara Quinn truly desired to be a real wife to Henry Young, but she absolutely didn't want him to do this to her as if completing a task, especially now, having just decided to leave him. How could she be entangled with him further? She struggled, but her body was weary, devoid of strength. Her resistance was easily suppressed, her hands pinned above her head, his cold, imposing figure pressing down, his free hand unbuckling his trousers. Sensing what was about to happen, Clara Quinn panicked. She didn't want this ambiguous intimacy with Henry Young. She twisted, trying to escape, but her movements only fueled his burning desire. He pressed against her, poised to take her. No, don't, Henry Young. Please, let me go. Tears welled in Clara Quinn's eyes as she looked at the handsome face inches from hers, her plea a choked whisper. She shouldn't have provoked him. Humiliating as his words were, she shouldn't have let her emotions get the better of her. Henry Young's fingers probed, finding her dry. Lust flared in his dark eyes. Seeing the tears on her small, pale face, he was inexplicably reminded of Lily Evans' tear-stained face. Any flicker of compassion vanished. Suppressing the urge to kiss her, he paused, then thrust forcefully into her. A searing pain ripped through Clara Quinn. She cried out, and the world went black. That day, she was a broken doll beneath Henry Young, contorted and ravaged, on the verge of shattering. After an unknown time, consciousness flickered in the darkness. Clara Quinn slowly awoke, her eyes blinking open, instinctively scanning her surroundings. The room was pitch black. She was alone in the large bedroom. Switching on the bedside lamp, the frantic memories flooded back. Her face paled. She instinctively curled into a ball, but every bone ached, especially below, where the slightest movement felt like it would split her apart. The images replayed like a slow-motion film. There was no tenderness, no affection in his lovemaking, only brutal release. He hadn't even undressed her, hadn't even given her a kiss. Her dream wedding night had ended in this agonizing way. Clara Quinn wanted to cry but couldn't. She lay there, clutching the covers, silently weeping. Suddenly, she heard the rush of running water. She froze, biting her lip. The only people who could openly bathe here were her and Henry Young. Chapter 13, Shattered. Hadn't he left yet? A flicker of something stirred in Clara Quinn's cold heart. The continuing sound of running water extinguished that fragile hope. She wrapped the covers tightly around herself, chilled to the bone, her heart frozen. Hadn't she known all along? He'd taken her without even the most basic foreplay, proof of his disgust, his revulsion. He couldn't bear to touch her. Now, he was surely desperate to wash away any trace of her. When Henry Young, fully dressed in his suit, emerged from the bathroom, he saw Clara Quinn trembling under the covers. A chilling smirk twisted his lips. His voice, cold and raspy, echoed in the large room. "Clara Quinn, I've fulfilled your wish. In return, I expect no further tricks from you." Amidst the words, pure menace and stark warning lay bare. "Wishes?" Clara Quinn scoffed, her heart a chilling void in that moment. A raspy, sardonic voice, barely audible, yet distinct through the covers, spoke. "Henry Young, what a pity. I had intended to leave you, grant you freedom, but who told you to touch me? I'm a loyal woman, so, I've changed my mind. Since my birth, no one has dared to steal from me. From now on, if any woman dares to approach you, I swear, I'll make her life a living hell." Clara Quinn, stubborn as a mule, and often, this very stubbornness would utterly wound her. Henry Young's deep-set eyes instantly filled with intense murderous intent. He abruptly lunged towards the bed, ripping off the covers with one hand. Seeing Clara Quinn lying naked on the bed, a low growl escaped from deep within his throat. "Clara Quinn." Despair engulfed Clara Quinn's every thought. She covered her suddenly exposed breasts, her body curling up as she turned her back to Henry Young, speechless. Her heart, long shattered, now her body too, felt violated. What did she have left to fear? A sharp, tense low pressure permeated the entire bedroom, the atmosphere so heavy it was suffocating. Just then, a cheerful, clear ringtone abruptly pierced the silence. Henry Young pulled out his phone, glancing at the flashing name on the screen. "The girl from last night, Susan Ward." He answered. Henry, sob, sob, sob. Susan Ward cried out his name, then dissolved into sobs. "Speak." Henry Young frowned, holding the phone slightly away from his ear, tersely uttering a single word. He'd saved her number only because her eyes and eyebrows bore a slight resemblance to Lily Evans. But this didn't mean she had the right to disturb him any time she pleased. I was with some men, sob, sob, sob. Susan Ward huddled in a dead-end alley, tears smearing her makeup, her choked sobs sounding utterly pitiful. Can you come pick me up? My clothes are torn." Her words were veiled, but a sharp mind like Henry Young's immediately grasped the implication. His fierce gaze fixed on Clara Quinn's smooth, white back. Sensing her body stiffen for a few seconds, he almost instantly concluded that Clara Quinn was behind this. "Wait there." He spat out 2 words, hung up, and grabbed her wrist, yanking her up. Clara Quinn cried out, instinctively covering her chest. Just as she was about to speak, a sharp slap landed on her face, followed by a low, suppressed growl. "Clara Quinn. I thought you were just being childish, so I tolerated you until now. I never expected you to become so vicious, to actually send someone to do such a despicable thing." Clara Quinn was dazed from the slap. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She couldn't argue, after all. Even she hadn't anticipated that her words, meant to ruin Susan Ward, would be misinterpreted by Lisa as an order to gang rape her. She'd only wanted Lisa to release photos of Susan Ward working at the Imperial Palace, effectively ending her career in the entertainment industry. This scene was so much like what happened more than 6 months ago, when Henry Young also refused to listen to her explanation, believing that Lily Evans's disappearance was her fault. Yet, unexpectedly, it takes 2 to tango. If Lily Evans hadn't been tempted by the benefits she promised, why would she have willingly flown the coop? Between her and him, there was a deep chasm, one she might never cross in this lifetime. Her cheeks burned as if on fire, threatening to consume her, yet Clara Quinn felt a chilling coldness creep through her. Henry's retreating back lingered before her eyes, she clenched her fists, her heart aching. The hurt from her brother, the lack of understanding from her parents, the torment from her lover, all pushed her to the brink of collapse. Why? They only saw the pain of others, but who knew her suffering? She abandoned her pride, discarded herself, loved, only to receive deeper wounds and pain. Why? Chapter 14, a haggard figure. The bedside phone rang. Clara Quinn fumbled for it and saw it was Vivian Bloom. Hastily wiping her tear-streaked face, Clara Quinn slowly sat up, took a deep breath, composed herself, and pressed the answer button. "Clara, everything's taken care of, don't worry." Vivian Bloom's voice couldn't hide her concern. "Don't be too angry, she won't cause any more trouble." It was her fault for not being clear, leading Vivian Bloom to misunderstand her intentions. Though she felt it was a bit much, she knew Vivian Bloom did it for her, so she didn't blame her. "Darling, thank you." Clara Quinn sniffed, forcing a smile. "You're always so good to me. Don't be so formal with me." Vivian Bloom always doted on her. Whatever Clara Quinn asked, as long as she could do it, she would try her best to help. "You sound like something's wrong." Clara Quinn shook her head, then, remembering Vivian Bloom couldn't see her, added, "Don't worry, just feeling a bit under the weather. I'll be fine after some sleep." Hanging up, Clara Quinn curled up, wrapping the blanket tightly around herself, as if seeking warmth. Drifting in and out of consciousness, she seemed to hear a car stopping, the front door opening and closing, then voices. Wearily opening her eyes, Clara Quinn's brows furrowed. She recognized a woman's voice, Susan Ward. He had the audacity to bring her home. What did he take her for? Just how much did he hate her? Upon entering, Henry's steps involuntarily halted, his gaze drawn to a certain room on the second floor. His eyes narrowed, his expression darkening. "How is she?" His voice was cold, the words expressing concern, but the tone was anything but gentle. Susan Ward, draped in Henry's coat and held in his embrace, felt a pang of discomfort, yet her heart pounded at his words. She knew Henry's nature, regardless of his tone, the fact he bothered to express concern meant he cared. She'd never imagined he'd bring her home, and now that he had, it further solidified this unspoken understanding. Much better now. Susan Ward, already tall and striking, managed to appear vulnerable. "If you hadn't arrived in time, I truly don't know what I would have done." A flicker of disgust crossed Henry's eyes, and the corner of his lips curled slightly. "Go take a shower. I'll have someone bring you clean clothes." Upstairs, a door suddenly burst open, slamming against the wall with a resounding crash. The noise was so loud that both people downstairs instinctively looked up. Clara Quinn was pale and listless, looking as if she'd just endured a serious illness. But her eyes blazed with fury, making Susan Ward instinctively cower closer to Henry Young. The sight of Henry Young embracing Susan Ward was like 1,000 knives piercing Clara Quinn's eyes and heart, driving her to the brink of madness. Consumed by rage, she wanted nothing more than to rip Susan Ward from his arms. "Clara Quinn, stop making a scene." He narrowed his eyes, his voice cold. She laughed bitterly. A scene? Was it truly a scene? Did he find her embarrassing, or was he afraid others would learn of her existence? "Me, making a scene? Henry Young, when you wanted me yesterday, did you consider my embarrassment then?" She took a step forward, standing by the second-floor railing, her fingernails digging into the wood. "Whether you want to admit it or not, I, Clara Quinn, am still your lawful wife, Henry Young. No matter how much you loathe me, you are still bound to me. Whether you like it or not, I have the right to forbid anyone else from coming near you." Her gaze swept toward Susan Ward, a flash of murderous intent in her eyes. She didn't know when her thoughts had become so extreme, her actions so unlike herself, but the mere sight of another woman beside him ignited a desire to tear them apart. "Henry!" Susan Ward whimpered, burying her face in Henry Young's chest. Clara Quinn took a deep breath. At this moment, though Susan Ward looked pathetic, she herself wasn't much better, perhaps even more wretched. The pain lingered in her body, her face as pale as a starving ghost, and she felt as if she might collapse at any moment. She swallowed hard, a sudden question arising in her mind. Was this reckless, moth-to-a-flame pursuit of him truly worth it? Then she laughed bitterly. Worth it or not, the decision wasn't hers to make. She had loved him for so long, yearned for him for so long. In her world, loving him had become seemingly the only thing she could do, a persistence stretching from childhood across countless years. She had changed, and so had he. Chapter 15. Her fury. If she were forced to give him up now, Clara Quinn didn't know what she would become, nor did she dare to imagine it. Her head spinning, Clara Quinn gradually suppressed her emotions. Did Susan Ward really think she could flaunt herself in front of Clara Quinn with impunity? Did she believe Henry Young's protection made her untouchable? Susan Ward, don't say I never gave you a chance. Clara Quinn said this calmly, glanced at Henry Young, turned around with a straight back, and returned to her room. Even though her body ached and her head felt like it was about to explode, her pride wouldn't allow her to appear too pathetic. Like a lioness, after roaring and clawing, she silently licked her wounds, refusing to let others see her vulnerability. That was Clara Quinn's pride, and no one was allowed to trample on it. Henry Young watched Clara Quinn's retreating figure, an inexplicable feeling rising in his chest. He frowned slightly, puzzled. Go wash yourself in the second room over there. As soon as Clara Quinn was out of sight, Henry Young released Susan Ward. Henry, Susan Ward wanted to say something more, but Henry Young's indifferent glance silenced her. Henry Young was a man of particular habits. He naturally disdained to touch a woman who had been handled by a group of men. As for why he had saved Susan Ward, he didn't know. On second thought, Clara Quinn was his wife in name. If Susan Ward reported the incident to the police, he would be implicated. It was better to handle the matter discreetly and tell Susan Ward to keep quiet. Furthermore, Henry Young had his pride. He wouldn't be led by the nose by a woman. Clara Quinn's behavior only increased his aversion to her. She married him and still wanted to control him. Fine, he would openly bring someone home. What could she do about it? With the presence of a third person, the house felt even more suffocating. Clara Quinn felt she couldn't stay a moment longer. After showering and tidying herself up, Clara Quinn looked at her transformed reflection in the mirror and offered herself a comforting smile. Clara Quinn, he just hasn't discovered your good qualities yet. Constant dripping wears away the stone. One day, he will love you, she told herself. Downstairs, Henry Young was lounging on the sofa, smoking. Clara Quinn glanced at Henry Young and walked straight to the door. What? Going back to work at the Imperial Palace? Henry Young's voice was somber, revealing no emotion. Clara Quinn paused, her hand on the doorknob, biting her lip, silent. Does the Quinn family not have any money, or can I, Henry Young, not afford to keep you? Why do you have to go to such a place? Clara Quinn, know your limits. Don't let the reporters catch you, it won't be pleasant for anyone. His words reignited her barely suppressed anger. She slammed the partially open door shut, the loud bang shaking the house. If it weren't for Marcus Quinn, would she be going to the Imperial Palace? She went there to stop Marcus Quinn from further self-destruction, to prevent him from ruining himself over a woman. She risked offending Henry Young again to go to the Imperial Palace and stop him. And what did she get in return? It was fine if they didn't understand her, she didn't expect them to. But what about her own brother? Even if he had some affection for her, some pity, how could he hurt her like that? Taking a deep breath, Clara Quinn suddenly burst out laughing. First, I don't need to live my life according to anyone's whims. Second, I have my reasons for doing things, and it's not your place to point your finger at me. Third, my sacrifices have never required repayment, but they also don't deserve to be trampled on. She tried to keep her voice calm, coldly saying, you should keep a better eye on the girl you just brought home. She certainly wasn't unemployed, and she wouldn't stoop to working in a mixed-up place like the Imperial Palace. She hadn't been living off her family since she became an adult, and as for Henry Young? Before she tried to make him love her, she never relied on him. He naturally didn't know what she did because his eyes never lingered on her. She feared she was the most miserable wife in the world. Leaving the house, Clara Quinn first hailed a taxi and went to the pharmacy. She didn't think she was ready for pregnancy now, even though the odds of winning the lottery were slim, but one couldn't rule out the possibility. If any mistakes happened, it wouldn't be the outcome she wanted. In the tea house opposite the pharmacy, Ethan Reed was chatting with some friends when his gaze suddenly stopped outside the window, a frail figure across the street catching his eye. Even from that distance, he could tell she seemed a little lost in thought. "Ethan, what are you looking at?" "The investment I'm talking about, do you think it's feasible?" the person next to him asked repeatedly before pulling Ethan Reed back to reality. Chapter 16 I am your father. "Well, if you guys think it's good, then go ahead," Ethan Reed smiled, his captivating face enough to make anyone swoon in an instant. With his hands placed behind the sofa, he exuded an air of laziness and indifference. "Such a trivial matter and you called me out? Is there anything you guys can't decide on your own?" Ethan Reed and a few close friends pooled their capital to open a small company specializing in real estate development. Actually, saying they co-founded it was less accurate than saying Ethan Reed invested everything, and his friends were fully in charge. He was the idle boss. Basically, they made all the decisions, and Ethan Reed was only responsible for collecting the money. His friends touched their noses. The things they just talked about were actually minor matters. There was a more important issue. "It's just that the trustee we recently worked with seems to have suddenly run off. Fatty and I searched high and low but couldn't find out who was behind that small company." Ethan Reed didn't seem to care, his gaze still drifting outside the window. A small figure walked into the pharmacy, then walked out, holding a box of medicine and going to the vending machine next to it. She rummaged through her bag, frowned slightly, and stamped her foot. "Then switch to a different property. Are your brains clogged lately? Having money and not earning it makes you fools. Why bother caring about what they do if your minds are troubled?" His friend still wanted to say something, but he had already stood up from the sofa. "I suddenly have something to do. Investigate that person if you can. If not, then switch to a different property. You guys decide." With that, he grabbed his coat and strode out. They exchanged glances, the unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. The other party expected compensation, claiming their conditions were too harsh, demanding recompense for some nebulous emotional distress caused by the 2-week delay. Though not short on cash, this was the first time they'd been so thoroughly outmaneuvered. The previously overlooked clauses in the contract now gaped like pitfalls, waiting for them to stumble in. In the end, the negotiations fell apart, leaving them with nothing but a hefty loss. Ethan Reed's behavior struck them as odd. They shared looks, shrugging silently. Stepping outside, Ethan Reed realized the figure he'd seen across the street had vanished. The sadness and disorientation that had clung to her hadn't been a trick of the light. Could Henry Young have been bullying her again? His usual air of languid indifference stemmed from a lack of anything worth caring about. Seeing Clara Quinn like this stirred something unfamiliar within him, perhaps a lingering echo of their unusual encounter that night. A commotion erupted ahead. Ethan Reed looked up, his heart leaping into his throat at the sight of a familiar flash of fabric. He hurried towards the scene. "Watch where you're going, you blind idiot. Don't you look before crossing the street?" A harsh voice snarled. The world swam before Clara Quinn's eyes. Near fainting from a day without food, she'd been careless crossing the street, narrowly avoiding being hit by a car. Too distraught to speak, she stood there, absorbing the torrent of abuse without retort. When had someone as proud and untamed as Clara Quinn ever endured such humiliation? "Get out of the way if you're all right. Don't hold up my business," the man roared, seeing her still standing in the street. Onlookers pointed and stared, but no one offered Clara Quinn a hand. Someone pushed through the crowd, glanced at Clara Quinn on the ground, frowned, then strode towards the shouting man, yanking him from his car and sending him sprawling with a well-placed punch. "Hey, hey, hey! Who do you think you are? I'm your daddy." Before the man could finish, Ethan Reed landed another blow to his gut. Ethan Reed operated outside the bounds of convention, convinced that no one in Imperial City, save Henry Young, deserved his deference. Anyone who crossed him would face his wrath. Using I with him, he'd show this punk who the real I was. Clara Quinn looked up, watching Ethan Reed pummel the man. As her dizziness subsided, she struggled to her feet and weakly tugged at his arm. Ethan Reed, not seeing her, reacted instinctively, nearly knocking her down again. He recovered quickly, steadying her before she could suffer another humiliating fall. The pills she'd been holding scattered on the ground. Clara Quinn bent to retrieve them. "Ethan Reed. What the hell are you doing? You'll kill him." Ethan Reed's face darkened, his gaze fixed on her hand. 24-hour emergency contraception. She was taking that. Why? Could it be that Ethan Reed knew he shouldn't be thinking about this now, but he couldn't help himself. Moreover, a damn discomfort gnawed at him. Clara Quinn followed his gaze, her expression shifting as she quickly hid her hand behind her back. She'd let him see that again. Everyone knew Ethan Reed and Henry Young were thick as thieves. If Ethan told Henry, who knew what Henry would think? Biting her lip, Clara Quinn lifted her chin to meet Ethan Reed's gaze, her eyes flashing. "Whether I die or not is none of your business. If you want to hit me, go ahead. I have things to do. I'm leaving." With that, she turned to leave, but Ethan Reed grabbed her arm. Bloody annoying. Clingy as a leech. She had to put up with Henry Young's crap, but that didn't mean everyone could push her around. Ethan Reed. Clara Quinn glanced at the onlookers, her voice finally lowering. She raised her head, revealing red marks on her pale neck, vibrant as freshly picked strawberries. Seeing him staring at her neck again, Clara Quinn blushed, her free hand flying up to cover it. Annoyance and discomfort warred within her, her eyes welling up. Why did everyone bully her? Acquaintances, strangers, loved ones, those she barely knew. She was already miserable, and now he was humiliating her in front of all these people. Ethan Reed glanced at the surrounding crowd, then back at Clara Quinn's reddened eyes. He cursed, then barked, "What are you looking at? Get lost." He pulled out his wallet, threw a wad of cash at the man he'd just hit, and dragged Clara Quinn away. Clara Quinn opened her mouth, bewildered by Ethan Reed's sudden anger. She tried to call out to him, to make him stop, but his grip was too strong. No matter how she called, he didn't budge. Hashtag Chapter 17, Dinners on Me. A feast was laid out before them, emitting a tantalizing aroma that made their mouths water. Clara Quinn swallowed, glancing up at the man sitting opposite her with his arms crossed. He tilted his chin, gesturing for her to help herself. Clara Quinn figured something was definitely up with Ethan Reed. No such thing as a free lunch. For her, that applied to everyone. She hadn't forgotten his contemptuous look from the other day. This sudden change in attitude made her wary. What's the meaning of this? Clara Quinn felt it best to clarify things before accepting his hospitality. It was always better to ask up front. "I heard your stomach rumbling just now. Or was I mistaken? Have you already eaten?" Ethan Reed asked with a smirk. Her stomach rumbling. She was starving, but she hadn't even heard it herself. This is a feast fit for a king. You'd think you were throwing a party. It's a bit extravagant for just me, isn't it? Clara Quinn raised an eyebrow. I know you're loaded, Ethan Reed, but there's no need to be so wasteful. I wasn't sure what you liked, so I ordered a bit of everything. Eat what you want. If you don't, consider it practice for Reed Enterprises chefs. A chance for them to hone their culinary skills. Ethan Reed's tone was nonchalant. Clara Quinn suddenly realized this small, European-style restaurant seemed to belong to Reed Enterprises, which explained his extravagant display. Turns out he wasn't footing the bill. With that thought, Clara Quinn picked up her chopsticks. Whatever his motives, he wouldn't harm her, and she was famished. Right now, filling her stomach was the priority. As the food touched her lips, Clara Quinn gave a wry smile. Even a near stranger, someone she'd met only a few times, knew she was hungry. Knew she was uncomfortable, knew to prepare a table of food for her to choose from, knew to show her a little concern. But what about that other person? Only pain, but she chose this path, so who could she blame? She buried her head in her food, silent. The phone on the table rang. Clara Quinn answered, her expression sour. It was her mother again. "Mother, if you're still calling about Marcus Quinn, hang up," Clara Quinn said bluntly. "I'll say it again, he brought this on himself. Let him face the consequences. Even if he gets beaten to death, it has nothing to do with me." Her anger still simmered, the mere thought of yesterday's events chilled her to the bone. "Clara, come home and talk to your father. He listens to you the most. He wants to disown your brother, and no one can stop him." Mrs. Quinn's voice was anxious, on the verge of tears. Clara Quinn frowned. Her mother was never this distraught. What could have happened to warrant disownment? What's going on? Disown him? What did he do to make father so angry? Clara Quinn asked. "Someone sent your father photos of your brother carousing. You know your father disapproves of his idleness. Usually, he's out of sight, out of mind, but this time, with the photos, your father is furious. He almost threw your brother out of his hospital bed." Mrs. Quinn sighed, her voice laced with worry. "He's just a playboy, not a bad kid. You and your brother have always had a good relationship. Can you help him?" A good relationship? What kind of good relationship did she have with Marcus Quinn? It wasn't even cordial. In his eyes, she was the enemy. "Mother, you overestimate my relationship with Marcus Quinn." Clara Quinn gave a bitter laugh but refrained from further comment. She was proud, stubborn, and rebellious, but she knew her limits. She wouldn't cause her parents undue worry. How Marcus Quinn treated her was irrelevant, what mattered was her parents' love. "Clara. Mother, don't worry. I'll come home this afternoon and talk to father." Hanging up, Clara Quinn rubbed her forehead. Troubles kept piling up. Why did everyone think she was idle, always finding something for her to do? Who had Marcus Quinn offended to have his photos sent to her father? "What's wrong?" Ethan Reed asked, noticing her distress. "My father is furious. He wants to disown Marcus Quinn." Clara Quinn set down her chopsticks, feeling quite satisfied. "Thank you for the meal. I didn't hold back. I need to go persuade my father. I'll treat you next time. Wasn't your relationship with Marcus Quinn always terrible? He treated you so poorly yesterday. Why are you still trying to help him?" His impression of her seemed stuck on the image of a spoiled, arrogant, selfish, and envious young lady, acting on whims. Largely due to Henry Young's influence, he still held that belief. But the current situation seemed to deviate from his expectations. "No matter how badly he treats me, he's still my brother." Clara Quinn shrugged, picking up her handbag and standing. "I'll be going then. I'll treat you to a meal next time." Ethan Reed watched her proud, straight back as she walked out, no longer the distressed figure he had seen before. "No matter how badly he treats me, he's still my brother." Ethan Reed's gaze was slightly unfocused. Could such magnanimity truly come from a spoiled, unreasonable young woman? Or had she always possessed such a heart? They say love often drives people to madness, consumes them, and makes them lose all reason, leading them to do things they don't even understand. She couldn't bear to see another person with the one she loved, resorting to all sorts of schemes just to be by his side. This approach was irrational, but it all stemmed from a single word, love. To love, yet not be loved in return, is the greatest sorrow. Ethan Reed leaned back against the sofa, his eyes narrowing slightly. They say those involved are often blinded. When would the object of her affection finally recognize her goodness? Chapter 18. Like a child, Clara Quinn first called to check on the girls in her small workshop, then addressed the recently received case. As she expected, the other party couldn't meet her demands. Harsh demands. So be it. At worst, they wouldn't take the job. As for the losses, naturally, the other party would bear them. The dozen or so people in her small workshop depended on her for their livelihood. She couldn't afford to operate at a loss. Indeed, Clara Quinn's side hustle was real estate development. Others bid on projects, and upon winning, they came to her workshop for plans. If they were satisfied with the finished product, she got paid. Dissatisfied? Then tough luck, they covered the labor, material, financial costs, and emotional distress. The one collaborating with Ethan Reed's real estate company was Clara Quinn. Only neither of them knew it. The other party still intended to cooperate with her. Clara Quinn was currently observing their behavior. If they performed well, the collaboration would continue. If not, and they acted entitled, she'd bid them farewell. After giving the girls some instructions on the next steps, Clara Quinn felt at ease. The small studio doesn't require your worry, you naturally have complete faith in the work produced by those under your command. To be honest, Clara Quinn preferred handling her own affairs, disliking the imposition of excessive pressure upon herself. While Quinn Enterprises possessed wealth, Clara Quinn never entertained the notion of being defined by it. She held little affection for the place and didn't desire others to drape her in the reflected glory of Quinn Enterprises, thus she rarely made her presence known there. Despite her infrequent visits to Quinn Enterprises, a majority of the company's employees recognized her. Her reputation wasn't stellar, the assessments of her character less so. Gossip painted her as clinging to her father's coattails to marry Henry Young, CEO of the Young Corporation, and furthermore, as failing to win popular affection. She didn't refute it. After all, the sole accomplishment she'd achieved through familial influence was indeed marrying Henry Young. "Is my father here?" Recognizing Clara Quinn, the secretary nodded and replied, "The CEO just returned, his complexion rather poor. Something seems to have angered him, he stated he won't see anyone." "That old man is always like this," Clara Quinn mused, touching her chin. "I'll go in myself, you needn't announce me." The secretary, understanding that the CEO's seeing no one excluded the individual before her, nodded and resumed her work. Clara Quinn knocked, receiving no response. Immediately after, she pushed the door open, poked her head in, and blinked, taking in the scene. "Didn't I say," the man in the office stated forcefully, his tone laced with barely concealed irritation. Looking up and seeing Clara Quinn, his words trailed off. Clara Quinn's eyes crinkled in a smile as she bounced into the room. Closing the door behind her, she sauntered towards him, an expression of playful displeasure on her face. "Dad, why so fierce? You're awfully scary." Clara Quinn clasped her hands behind her back, feigning a stern expression. Upon seeing his beloved daughter, Christopher Quinn's gloomy countenance softened somewhat. "This girl, you usually swear you'd rather die than come to the company. What brings you here today?" "Someone who didn't know better might think my daughter, now married, has no further need for this old man." Christopher Quinn sighed, feigning self-pity. Clara Quinn chuckled, proceeding to drape herself over her father's back as she habitually did, her arms encircling his neck. Rubbing her face against his, she said in a coaxing tone, "Who said that? The person I love most is, of course, still you, Dad. Anyone who dares to anger you, I absolutely won't forgive them." "You're certain you haven't come to plead that rascal's case?" No one understood Clara Quinn better than Christopher Quinn. His daughter, raised since childhood in the palm of his hand, couldn't conceal her thoughts or intentions from him. Clara Quinn stuck out her tongue. Nothing she thought or did escaped her father's discerning gaze. Certainly not. He dared to anger you like that, how could I easily forgive him? Not beating him to death is already showing mercy. Clara Quinn sighed, not directly pleading his case. Kick him out, kick him out. Isn't it a disgrace to you? Expel him from the family, sever the father-son relationship, and then let Quinn Enterprises be divided among a bunch of outsiders for the shareholders to squabble over. Hayes, Marcus Quinn is a good-for-nothing anyway, what use is he? Am I right, Dad? Christopher Quinn was momentarily stunned, then finally smiled, tapping Clara Quinn's nose, a mixture of exasperation and amusement in his eyes. Don't you see this is your youngest daughter's reverse psychology? She's telling you if you sever ties with Marcus Quinn, when you're 100 years old, Quinn Enterprises will have no heir and sooner or later fall into someone else's hands. Someone else? Without my brother, Quinn Enterprises is still mine. How could you let it go to someone else? He hadn't even finished speaking when, as soon as she did, Marcus Quinn jumped back 3 meters, keeping his distance. No, no. Shaking her head like a rattle, Clara Quinn waved her hands repeatedly. Dad, don't make trouble for me. I don't want to take over that mess. Doing nothing but eating would shave 10 years off my life thanks to those old geezers on the board. Sitting in a dark office every day, dealing with endless documents, she didn't want that kind of life. Ha ha. His previous anger dissipated, and Christopher Quinn finally laughed heartily. You silly girl, others would beg for this opportunity, yet you keep refusing. Leave the good stuff to Marcus Quinn, I don't need it. Clara Quinn shrugged, hopping onto Christopher Quinn's desk. Dad, be mad all you want, but you'll lose your good looks if you keep it up. I'm already an old man, what good looks are left? Christopher Quinn affectionately stroked Clara Quinn's hair. His expression darkened as he noticed his daughter's haggard appearance, her frame seemingly thinner. Is that young brat bullying you? Why is my precious girl so thin? The smile on Clara Quinn's face froze, then returned to normal. Of course not. Who's your daughter? Who dares bully me? I'd beat them to death. Clara Quinn swung her fist, feigning ferocity. Christopher Quinn felt helpless again. A married daughter is like spilled water. Though he knew it was short-sighted to marry her off so quickly, his daughter was stubborn, seeing no one but Henry Young. With her personality, even if she was suffering, she would never complain to him. You girl, always yelling about hitting this person or that person. When have I ever seen you actually do it? Christopher Quinn sighed. Clara Quinn lowered her head. If her father knew she'd hurt someone, would he blame her? She truly couldn't control herself. Though Susan Ward's incident was unintentional, not the outcome she desired, it ultimately stemmed from her impulsiveness. Dad, just manage Quinn Enterprises well. If you're too busy, call Marcus Quinn back. Give him work, aren't you afraid he'll cause trouble outside again? Clara Quinn offered a suggestion, determined to keep Marcus Quinn too occupied for mischief. Sooner or later, something would happen otherwise. Not a bad idea. After I discuss it with the board, I'll have him come to the company. Chapter 19, deeply wounded. Although Clara Quinn's father claimed he wouldn't interfere in her affairs, he worried about Henry Young's recklessness harming his daughter. He called Henry Young's father overseas, ostensibly for a chat, but subtly hinted that Henry Young should treat his daughter well and not wrong her. That night, Daddy Young called Henry Young, questioning if he'd mistreated Clara Quinn and ordering him to care for her, threatening repercussions if he didn't. Henry Young agreed. After the call, his face darkened. He spun his pen, then chuckled coldly. Running to his parents? Clara Quinn, you're truly something. It seems I've been too kind, making you increasingly audacious. Treat you well? Fine. He slammed his pen down, grabbed his coat, and stormed out. Past midnight, Clara Quinn knew it would be another night without Henry Young. He usually didn't return. Swallowing a sleeping pill and rubbing her aching head, she prepared for bed. A car below surprised her. Was Henry Young back? A door slammed downstairs, shaking the house. Then, her bedroom door was kicked open, the force revealing the arrival's fury. Henry Young, what's your problem now? Clara Quinn frowned, biting her lip. Her headache left her with little energy to argue. Henry Young glared, eyes blazing as if to incinerate her. Clara Quinn, still playing dumb? He sneered, advancing, gripping her chin, forcing her face up. Feeling powerful? Not good enough for you? Clara Quinn stumbled, his grip threatening to crush her jaw. Henry Young. The pain and bewilderment nearly made her faint. Let go. Get out. Get out. Heh. His eyes were fierce, convinced she meant the opposite. Isn't this what you want? Me away from you? Want someone else? He emphasized want. You're shameless. Shame overwhelmed her. Shameless? He shoved her, sending her sprawling. Her lower back slammed into the table's corner. Always sensitive to pain, the impact nearly knocked her unconscious. Gritting her teeth, she struggled to stand. She was baffled. She hadn't provoked him, he'd returned in a rage, unleashing incomprehensible accusations. Before she could steady herself, he yanked her up, threw her onto the bed, and ripped at her clothes without a word. Terror seized Clara Quinn. She fought him, the previous night's nightmare vivid in her mind, the bone-deep pain, both physical and emotional. Why did he always treat her this way? What had she done? The sleeping pill had muddled her senses. She was no match for Henry Young's strength even at her best, let alone now. Rip. Her delicate clothes tore. She recoiled, trying to escape his grasp, but found herself trapped. She raised her hands to shield herself, but he forced them above her head. Clara Quinn, don't give me that pitiful look. Didn't you tell my father I don't love you enough? Well, I'll show you love. He spat out the word, love. Told his father. When? Her own father had called Henry Young's father, she realized bitterly. She was too tired to explain. He wouldn't believe her anyway, it was just an excuse. Clara Quinn flushed, struggling even to move her fingers. Her head spun, her throat burned. She tried to speak, but no sound came out. Exhausted, she closed her eyes, surrendering to the waves of discomfort. She heard voices, the same disdainful tone. Too weak to speak, she ignored them. Then, someone approached, looked down at her, and touched her forehead. After that, she knew nothing. Clara Quinn awoke to a white wall, the sharp scent of antiseptic filling the air. She frowned, her head throbbing. She didn't understand why she was here. She tried to raise a hand to her forehead, but another hand stopped her. She turned to see Henry Young. And four dripped into her raised arm. Was she sick? Why was she in a hospital? Had Henry Young brought her here in her delirium? Clara Quinn opened her mouth, finding her throat parched. Chapter 20, Hospitalized with illness. Henry Young, his face etched with annoyance, turned and poured her a glass of water, handing it to her impatiently. Clara Quinn took it and drained it in one gulp. Why am I here? Clara Quinn asked. She thought to herself how foolish she was, asking Henry Young instead of waiting for the nurse to come and check on her. You had a fever. You were delirious and unconscious yesterday, Henry Young answered her question, unexpectedly. Clara Quinn's eyes lit up. So, Henry Young had taken care of her last night. Before she could fully rejoice, he tossed his phone to her, saying casually, call your friends yourself. I have things to do, I have to go. Clara Quinn watched his retreating figure without hesitation, lowering her eyes and chuckling at her own absurdity. He had never had feelings for her, yet she had naively believed that her illness could actually move him. Was there anyone more self-deceived than her? Holding the phone, Clara Quinn finally called Vivian Bloom. Henry Young felt that he was truly acting strangely. He loathed Clara Quinn, but yesterday, seeing her burning with fever and unconscious, he had been startled, even feeling a flicker of remorse. Turning his head to look back towards her hospital room, Henry Young frowned. Such a venomous, cunning, and scheming woman, how could she be worthy of his concern? How ridiculous. Hello, Ethan Reed, how's the girl I asked you to find coming along? He had to find a woman to divert his attention from Clara Quinn. Are you sure you want to find a woman? If your uncle finds out about this. Ethan Reed, you seem rather talkative today, Henry Young said with displeasure. Normally, if he said he wanted to find a woman, Ethan Reed would practically scramble to find him 18. Had the sun risen in the west today? He was actually advising him against it. All right, this old master gets it. I found someone for you, all right? Ethan Reed knew that once he made up his mind, anything he said was useless. Henry Young was, after all, his brother. He had asked, so he should help him. Where are you? Central Hospital. The hospital? Why are you at the hospital? Clara Quinn had a fever last night. I brought her to the hospital. What? She's hospitalized. Why did she have a fever? Ethan Reed asked immediately upon hearing the news. Henry Young frowned. He had only just mentioned Clara Quinn's fever, why was he so anxious? He suddenly recalled the scene that night of Ethan Reed carrying Clara Quinn away, and a thought flashed through his mind. Ethan Reed, Clara Quinn is my wife. His words couldn't be clearer. He was reminding Ethan Reed that Clara Quinn was his wife, and even though he loathed her, his good brother shouldn't have any designs on her. Ethan Reed froze. Realizing that his previous attitude could indeed be easily misunderstood. He let out a hearty laugh and said, look at what you're thinking. Clara Quinn isn't my type. Come to my pub later to pick up the girl. I've already got someone prepared for you. Hanging up the phone, Ethan Reed narrowed his eyes, suddenly feeling that things seemed to be spiraling a bit out of his control. Vivian Bloom, upon receiving a call from Clara Quinn and hearing that she was hospitalized, immediately panicked. Abandoning her work, she rushed to the hospital. However, halfway there, she spotted Henry Young's car. Pulling over, she witnessed him picking up a woman before driving off. Vivian Bloom frowned. With Clara Quinn in the hospital and Henry Young out picking up women, should she feel pity for Clara? Such a sweet, kind girl, and he didn't appreciate her. Sighing, she drove on. Pushing open the hospital room door, Vivian Bloom entered and, seeing Clara Quinn's increasingly haggard appearance, couldn't help but feel a pang of heartache. Darling, you're here. Clara Quinn smiled, pursing her lips. Did you bring me any yummy food? Vivian Bloom shook her head, holding up a large bag filled with snacks and fruit. Honestly, you never forget about food, you gluttonous cat, she teased. I know you're the best to me. Clara Quinn reached out to hug Vivian Bloom, but Vivian quickly stopped her. My little ancestor, behave yourself. You're on and 4 drip. If the needle falls out, you'll be the one suffering, Vivian Bloom scolded, fixing her with a stern look. Clara Quinn stuck out her tongue, completely disregarding her threat. It's not that serious. It's bandaged. A little wiggle won't hurt. No need to make a fuss. Seeing her nonchalance, Vivian Bloom gave up on joking, raising her hands in surrender. All right, darling. I want an apple. Peel it for me. Okay, little ancestor. I'll peel it for you. While peeling the apple for Clara Quinn, Vivian Bloom contemplated whether to tell her about seeing Henry Young with another woman. Lost in thought, she almost sliced her hand with the fruit knife, only snapping back when Clara called her name several times. "What are you thinking about so intently?" "I was talking to you, and you weren't even listening," Clara Quinn complained, disgruntled. Vivian Bloom sighed, deciding she shouldn't keep it from her. "Clara, on my way here, I saw Henry Young pick up a woman from the deep," Vivian Bloom said, carefully observing Clara Quinn's expression. As expected, her face changed, her hand trembling as she held a glass of water, most of which spilled onto the bed. "He's already seeking out other women, just after I've been hospitalized." Clara Quinn fumed, her grip tightening on the glass. Did he intend to torment her further before casually seeking pleasure with another woman? Did he think it would be that easy? Vivian Bloom, anticipating her reaction, shook her head slightly. Whenever this topic arose, Clara Quinn seemed to transform into a different person. "Do you know who that woman was?" Clara Quinn gritted her teeth. Vivian Bloom shook her head, adding, "But she must be from the deep. The women at the deep are practically on par with our Imperial Palace. I was too far away to see clearly. Can you help me find out? I refuse to see another woman by his side. Just the thought of another woman beneath him drives me insane. If this woman dares to stay by his side, she better be prepared to leave Imperial City." Clara Quinn clutched Vivian Bloom's shirt. The foreline loosened due to excessive force, resulting in a patch of blood. Vivian Bloom quickly stopped her, preventing further self-harm, then pressed the call button for the nurse, comforting her, "Don't worry, I'll definitely help you. Leave this to me, just promise me you won't hurt yourself again." Clara Quinn turned her head in a daze, then instinctively nodded. For some reason, just hearing that he was with another woman made her completely lose control. She tried her best, but she still couldn't control her agitated emotions. Everything would be all right, she had promised her, so she would definitely do it for her. Chapter 21 Attending the banquet. Clara Quinn didn't know if Henry Young was doing it on purpose, but from that day on, she saw him with a different woman almost every few days. She'd find a way to get rid of one, and he'd bring another, as if watching her go mad was his amusement. Today, Clara Quinn was handling work at her studio when her staff told her the other party had sweet-talked them, increased the price, and wanted them to continue with the deal. Clara Quinn didn't object much. After all, once this deal was done, she would also profit. "Xiaomi, is there a banquet tonight?" Clara Quinn asked her assistant, looking at the invitation in her hand. "Yes, it's a former client we've collaborated with a few times. They specifically sent an invitation, saying you must give them face," Xiaomi said. Grinning at Clara Quinn. "Boss, do you think that boss has taken a liking to you? Get out of here," Clara Quinn said with a laugh. "They haven't even met me. I'd believe it more if they said they liked you." Xiaomi pouted, muttering, "If they liked me, that would be great. I could also marry rich, into real estate, a diamond tycoon. I wouldn't have to worry about food and clothing every day, or suck up to people for small deals." Clara Quinn was exasperated, but these people were always carefree in front of her, and she found them endearing. She also felt that only in such a work environment could she find her true self, relaxed, comfortable, and happy. Seeing Clara Quinn silent, the little assistant continued chattering, "Boss, look, our small studio has been established for 3 years, and you've always been behind the scenes, not even showing your face. Everyone is curious. Haven't you ever thought about revealing yourself one day? Always being so mysterious." Clara Quinn pondered. It wasn't that she was intentionally being mysterious, she just found it troublesome. Previously, when the studio was smaller, there were some things she simply didn't need to handle, and her staff could deal with them directly. But now the studio was doing better and better, having built a reputation in nearly 3 years and interacting with more people from different walks of life.